After 4 meetings in the Security Council failed to produce even a statement calling for de-escalation, the General Assembly have sought to fill the void, allowing UN officials and member states to ventilate their positions.
I call on the parties themselves to allow for mediation efforts to intensify in order to bring the fighting to an end. These horrific events did not arise in isolation. They must be viewed in the context of decades of military occupation, political deadlock, grievances and hopelessness, and the failure to address the core issues at the heart of the conflict.
More than 230 people have died in Gaza, including 65 children, while Israel has also suffered 12 deaths, including 2 children and a soldier, as Hamas rocket fire and Israeli airstrikes continue despite diplomatic efforts behind the scenes.
The Security Council must shoulder its responsibilities and overcome yet again its paralysis on the longest-standing item on its agenda. Inaction on this issue undermines, indeed hinders, the Council's and the United Nations' ability and credibility on other pressing peace and security matters.
Palestine's chief envoy pointed to long-standing status issues as among the root causes of the current conflict, including efforts to change the character of areas Palestine claims for a future independent state, including East Jerusalem.
To those who say that Israel has the right to defend itself, what right are you exactly talking about? Israel is a colonization power. It is occupying our land. It is persecuting a whole people. Israel would ask you, what would you have done if missiles were targeting your cities? But Israel forgets that its occupation is the root cause of the violence. So I would like to ask you, what would you do if your territory is occupied, if your people were displaced, if your people were killed, detained, arrested, and persecuted? How can an occupying power have the right to defend itself when a whole people under occupation is deprived of the very same right?
As diplomatic pressure continues to build on the parties towards a ceasefire, Israel argued it was a democratic state under attack from a terrorist organization, Hamas.
Let me remind you of what many of you unfortunately ignore. Hamas is an internationally designated jihadi terrorist organization that has fired more than 4,000 rockets at Israeli cities over the last 11 days. Right now, as I speak to you, Israeli civilians are running to find shelter from Hamas's indiscriminate attacks. Here is a quote from the Hamas charter. Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it obliterated others before it.
While no product is expected from the General Assembly, France this week introduced a Security Council resolution demanding an immediate cessation of hostilities in a text that stresses the urgent need for humanitarian assistance in Gaza, a measure that is unlikely to go anywhere over U.S. opposition. The resolution, unlike a statement, would be legally binding, and if put to a vote, is likely to attract a U.S. veto, despite otherwise broad consensus. Sherman Briceby's SABC News, New York.